known for many years, but we'd never worked together. And he was in a mood at that.
Clint Eastwood is known for his quiet stare, calm demeanour, and no-nonsense style, both on screen and behind the camera. But what happens when someone crosses a line with him? Not with a fight, not with a headline, but with total, permanent silence. No second chances, no drama. Just a quiet blacklist. From Hollywood icons to outspoken critics, Eastwood has shut doors that never reopened. Why? What really happened behind the scenes? And who were the few who made his silent cut?
Welcome the #1 international star, Mr. Clint Eastwood. You got a tough act to follow, you know that?
20th and Plum.
The year was 1993, and the Four Seasons Hotel in Beverly Hills was buzzing with post-Oscar energy. Inside the lobby, the usual mix of producers in sharp suits, actors with golden statues in hand, and publicists working overtime moved between tables and drinks. There was laughter, storytelling, and the kind of name-dropping that happens when everyone in the room is somebody. Near the grand piano, however, stood one man who wasn't joining the crowd: Clint Eastwood, villain nominee. By that time, Eastwood was already a respected figure in Hollywood. A former TV cowboy who had grown into an acclaimed director, he was known for his minimalist approach both on screen and in real life. He had just won Best Picture and Best Director for Unforgiven, a gritty western that flipped the genre on its head. But Clint Eastwood wasn't basking in the spotlight. He stood alone, arms crossed, silent. Across the room, a young actor, someone whose name had started appearing on casting lists and magazine covers, was surrounded by a group of listeners. He was telling a story, the kind actors tell when they're trying to impress, but it ended with a moment that many in the room would remember. The actor did an impersonation of Eastwood. It wasn't flattering. A squint, a raspy voice, a mocking tone. The group chuckled. Eastwood didn't. He didn't say a word, didn't raise an eyebrow or offer a smirk. He finished his drink, nodded once to the bartender, and walked out of the hotel without saying goodbye to anyone. There was no confrontation, no harsh words, just silence. But for those who had worked with Eastwood, or even heard the stories, the silence meant more than any outburst could have. Over the years, that story became something of a Hollywood myth. What exactly had Eastwood heard? Why did that actor's name slowly vanish from casting sheets, particularly those connected to Warner Bros., the studio Eastwood had worked with for decades? No official explanation was ever given. Clint never addressed it in interviews. There were no angry press statements, no dramatic walkouts, no grudges aired on talk shows. Mosky talked to agents, witnesses, and made many other people walkouts. He simply moved on, quietly and completely. And that pattern, as it turns out, wasn't unusual. Clint Eastwood's reputation as a man of few words wasn't just part of his on-screen persona, it carried over into his professional life. Unlike many figures in the film industry, Eastwood rarely spoke out when he was unhappy with someone. He didn't engage in public arguments or heated Twitter threads. He didn't threaten legal action or go on talk shows to clear the air. What he did, consistently, was far more permanent. He cut people off, quietly, for good. By the time Eastwood reached his 90s, that code of silence had become part of his legacy. Interviews with former crew members, co-stars, and collaborators painted a consistent picture. Clint was calm, fair, and deeply loyal, but only if you showed him the same respect. Cross that line, and he wouldn't fight you. He'd just disappear, your name wouldn't come up again, and you wouldn't be called back. This approach may seem old-fashioned in an era where every disagreement tends to go public, but Eastwood's brand of professionalism was rooted in something else: control. For decades, he's been one of the few filmmakers in Hollywood with near-complete autonomy over his work. He often directs, produces, and sometimes even composes the music for his films. He keeps his crew small and works fast. His sets are known for being quiet, efficient, and respectful. There's no yelling, no drama, no endless takes. In that environment, personal loyalty and trust become essential. Eastwood's longtime collaborators often stay with him for years, sometimes decades. Morgan Freeman, Bradley Cooper, Tom Stern, his go-to cinematographer, and editor Joel Cox are just a few of the names that have worked on multiple Eastwood projects. But that loyalty goes both ways. If someone breaks it, Eastwood doesn't try to mend fences, he just moves forward without them. It's not about revenge or pettiness, at least not in the traditional sense. For Eastwood, it appears to be more about boundaries. He has said in interviews that he doesn't like wasting time. He doesn't like repeating himself. And above all, he doesn't like ego disrupting the work. That mindset has served him well. Despite working in one of the most ego-driven industries in the world, Eastwood has managed to maintain both creative freedom and professional respect across multiple generations of Hollywood. But maintaining that kind of control often comes with a cost. While many in the industry respect Eastwood, some have also found themselves permanently on the outside of his circle, and over time a pattern started to emerge. A small group of well-known figures who, for one reason or another, crossed a line. Not always publicly, not always dramatically, but enough for Clint Eastwood to decide they weren't worth another phone call. These weren't minor disputes. They were moments that, in Eastwood's eyes, crossed a professional or personal boundary. Some involved clashes over creative direction. Others were about respect, what was said, how it was said, and where. In each case, Eastwood never went public with his side of the story, but those around him noticed the change. A name no longer appeared on call sheets. A casting suggestion was shot down without discussion. A person exists, you can't rule out a disappearance. A person exists, you can't rule out a disappearance. A professional relationship simply faded away. What's particularly interesting is that Eastwood's approach runs counter to the way modern Hollywood often deals with conflict. Today, when a disagreement arises, it tends to play out in interviews, in viral clips, or on social media platforms. There's often expectation that grievances should be aired, explained, and debated. But Clint Eastwood operates on a different timeline and a different philosophy. To him, silence isn't a weakness, it's finality. That silent, one-way door has become a defining part of his legacy. While fans often remember Eastwood for his iconic characters, Dirty Harry, the man with no name, William Money, it's the way he navigates real life that's arguably even more distinctive. He doesn't just walk away from conflict, he erases it. He doesn't believe in repairing broken trust. He believes in protecting the integrity of his work and the people he chooses to work with, And in a career that spanned over 6 decades, very few people have ever made it back once they were on the other side of that door. As Eastwood has grown older, he's spoken a little more openly about his past. Not much, but just enough for those close to him to start putting the pieces together. There are a handful of names that keep coming up: actors, directors, and public figures who once shared the spotlight with Eastwood and then never appeared beside him again. What makes these stories compelling isn't just who they involve, it's what they reveal about Clint Eastwood's values, his process, and his unwavering approach to loyalty. Because when Eastwood chooses silence, it's not to avoid confrontation. It's his version of closure. Quiet, cold, and absolute. In the years following the Four Seasons incident, Eastwood's self-imposed quiet code became even more evident in 2 very public but one-sided disputes, with directors Michael Moore and Spike Lee. Neither confrontation started with fanfare. Both were rooted in deeply held principles and personal conviction. And both ended the same way, with Eastwood's silence definitive and final. The first of these clashes began in 2005 at a National Board of Review Awards event. Michael Moore, the political documentary filmmaker behind Fahrenheit 9/11, was being celebrated for his Oscar-winning impact. Clint Eastwood was also present, having earned plaudits for $1 Million Baby. Moore had built a reputation as an outspoken provocateur, polarizing but influential. From the stage, Eastwood offered a calm yet startling line. "Michael Moore and I actually have a lot in common. We both appreciate living in a country where there's free expression. But Michael, if you ever show up at my front door with a camera, I'll kill you. I mean it." The audience reacted with laughter and nervous tension. It was delivered not as a punchline, but as a trimmed statement laden with weight. Eastwood didn't soften it or add a smile. He let it stand alone, like a stick in the ground. It was a line that would haunt talk shows and op-ed pages for weeks. Moore himself later confirmed the incident, writing in a Facebook post that he was a bit stunned by Eastwood's words, not knowing whether it was a joke or half a threat. Eastwood, on the other hand, refused to apologize. Years later at CinemaCon, he claimed he never literally meant it, but then quipped, "It isn't a bad idea." The line still gathered nervous laughter from the audience. At the heart of the conflict was more than a gag taken too far. Fahrenheit 9/11 had unfairly tarnished Eastwood's worldview. It criticized both the post-9/11 George W. Bush administration and US military policy, suggesting a kind of moral sloppiness. Eastwood, meanwhile, revered military heroes and believed in portraying them with restraint and respect. Moore, to him, wasn't reporting. Moore was exploiting. An opinion that shaped Eastwood's reaction and ultimate response: erasure. The result? Eastwood and Moore never collaborated again. There were no joint interviews, no public discussions. Whenever Moore visited Hollywood functions near Eastwood's circle, he reported nothing but cold distances and stiff professional dismissal. What might have been a lively public debate instead dissolved into silence. The second major confrontation began a few years later, but this one touched on history and representation and involved another respected director, Spike Lee. In 2008, Eastwood released 2 World War II films, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. The first traced the American side, with Eastwood as director, producer, and composer. The second explored the Japanese perspective. Spike Lee, speaking at Cannes in 2008, questioned the absence of black soldiers in these films. He pointed out, with some validity, that hundreds of black Marines served in the Pacific Theater during WIR, including at Iwo Jima. In his words, he did 2 films about Iwo Jima, and there was not one black soldier in both of those films. Many veterans, African Americans, are upset at Clint Eastwood. It was a criticism rooted in historical accountability. Lee went on to call Eastwood's version hurtful historical whitewashing. Eastwood responded sharply but quietly, saying in an interview, "A guy like him should shut his face. Has he ever studied history?" The tone was concise, but loaded. Eastwood wasn't negotiating or explaining. He was shutting down the idea that someone else could dictate how he told his story. He argued that his films focused on the men who raised the iconic flag over Mount Suribachi, the ones who appear in the famous photograph. By definition, those men were white. Eastwood believed his job was to dramatize that specific moment, not to retrofit narratives to meet political expectations. Lee didn't back down. He responded in interviews, "The man is not my father, and we're not on a plantation either." And he described Eastwood as an angry old man. The media picked it up. Headlines followed. The director's dispute, though brief, became a flashpoint for a broader debate about representation in cinema. Even the usually discreet Eastwood stepped back from his usual restraint, though not by apologizing. He refused to acknowledge Lee publicly, again. No joint appearances, no reconciliations. It took Steven Spielberg to act as a mediator. Lee later admitted that Spielberg encouraged him to move on. He said they were cool, although they never spoke directly. The relationship, for all intents and purposes, remained fractured. Looking at both conflicts, Moore and Lee, a pattern emerges. These weren't casual disagreements or clashes over minor points. They were fundamental challenges to Eastwood's identity. Moore's critique of American values hit Eastwood where he lived. Lee's criticism of historical authenticity touched Eastwood's sense of accuracy and artistic autonomy. Neither would be reason enough for Eastwood to engage in public debate, but both were more than mere words. They felt personal. In Moore's case, it was a literal threat. In Lee's, it was a question of cinematic integrity. Eastwood answered not with press conferences, but with a refusal to engage, and with forgetting. The names slowly vanished from consideration. The possibility of collaboration drifted away with time. Once absent from Eastwood's inner circle, it appears there was no turning back. Eastwood has consistently chosen creative allies who respect him. Morgan Freeman, Bradley Cooper, and Tom Stern among them. Those who challenge him publicly or interfere with his approach are quietly excluded. In Hollywood, silence is unusual. Disputes are broadcast. Lines are drawn in interviews, on red carpets, across social media. But for Clint Eastwood, silence has always been enough. It is not a retreat, but a statement. It is both a shield and a sword. He shuts the door, gently but decisively, and it stays shut. This is central to Eastwood's identity. It is not about holding grudges. It is about boundaries. He doesn't tolerate public disrespect or misrepresentation. He believes in quiet dignity. He doesn't apologize, and he doesn't explain. He just doesn't invite you back. But what does that mean for filmmaking, for creative expression, and for the way Hollywood handles criticism and representation in an increasingly sensitive era? By studying Eastwood's responses to Moore and Lee, we see a man whose voice is a whisper but whose message is loud. He values his autonomy, he protects his vision, and if insulting his principles or distorting his craft threatens that, he'll erase the disruption with silence and resolve. In the next part, we'll dive into Clint Eastwood's on-set relationships with some of the biggest stars in the world and explore how these differences in style, process, and ego shaped his silent professionalism even further. What happens when two strong creative forces meet on set and clash? Clint Eastwood has never shied away from partnering with big names, but for him, chemistry and respect are non-negotiable. When that combination falters, he doesn't make a scene. He lets the relationship evaporate. The first of these high-stakes on-set interactions involved Leonardo DiCaprio during the production of J. Edgar in 2011. DiCaprio arrived on set as one of the most intense method actors of his generation. He was known for drop-in emotional immersion, meticulous character work, and a need for a rehearsal. Clint Eastwood, on the other hand, had a reputation for efficiency and instinct. He favored shooting scenes in 1 or 2 takes to preserve energy and authenticity. From day one, those two approaches were in collision. DiCaprio would ask questions, ask for another run-through, dig into motivational detail. Eastwood would call cut after 1 or 2 takes and move on. Crew members whispered about the tension. One compared the dynamic to a racehorse being forced to move in cowboy boots. There were no yelling matches, no storming off set, no drama, but the tension was palpable. Neither man accommodated the other. One sought exploration, the other insisted on simplicity. DiCaprio reportedly did his best to adapt, yet the atmosphere remained controlled, no matter how much the actor needed to explore. Eastwood's priority was to keep the set moving with discipline and minimal friction. Their professionalism allowed the film to be completed without incident. J. Edgar was released to mixed reviews, with many praising the performances, but the professional relationship between actor and director never cracked into friendship, at least in public. Eastwood never asked DiCaprio back. There were no glowing interviews or words of praise. After the film, their paths diverged silently and permanently. It was as if the invisible tension on set echoed in their future decisions. DiCaprio continued to thrive in auteur-led films, while Eastwood returned to his trusted circle of collaborators: Morgan Freeman, Bradley Cooper, Tom Stern, and others. What this reveals is something fundamental about Eastwood's working style. He prefers economy, less rehearsal, fewer takes, and shorter shoots. He sees silence as powerful. He doesn't shy away from intensity, but he manages it quietly. When someone resists that pace or rhythm, the relationship ends not with anger, but with a mission. The second story takes place in a more public arena. In 2014, Eastwood released American Sniper, based on the life of Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. It was a commercial success, one of the highest-grossing films of the year, and a cultural moment that stirred debate. Amid the noise, one public comment stood out. A tweet from actor and comedian Seth Rogen, comparing American Sniper to the third act of Inglourious Basterds, suggesting it felt propagandistic. Rogen's comment was a joke. He framed it as satire, but implicitly it struck at Eastwood's legacy and the film's portrayal of military service. It was more than comedic riffing, it was a public jab. Eastwood famously never responded. He doesn't have a Twitter account or social media presence, but behind the scenes, according to insiders, he was far from amused. Those close to Eastwood considered it a disrespectful attack, a hit and run in a public space that bypassed any chance for dialogue. Rogen did later clarify that he wasn't equating American Sniper with Nazi propaganda, and that it was a throwaway line, but by then Eastwood had already decided. The line wasn't just a joke to him. In his world, it was a line crossed. The response? Silence. No public statements, no rebuttal. But Rogen's name was quietly removed from consideration in Eastwood's professional circle. Reportedly, Eastwood told collaborators that if Rogen's name ever appeared in casting discussions, it should be rejected. Not because of any formal blacklist, not as retaliation, but as a matter of respect for process. If you question his work in public, he doesn't respond, he resets. This method extends beyond social media commentary. It is a professional code, embedded in how Eastwood runs a film set, how he hires, and how he architecturally gates creative relationships. He is loyal to those who align with his methods, but deeply wary of those who challenge the pace, tone, or respect he has for his craft. He does not need to explain himself. He does not need drama. He just does not invite you back. Both interactions with DiCaprio and Rogen offer a clearer view of Eastwood's methods when dealing with perceived disrespect. One is an on-set tension between different artistic philosophies. The other is a public jab that touches on themes Eastwood sees as deeply personal. In each case, Eastwood's response is the same: silence and exclusion. Critics of Eastwood's approach might argue that some voices deserve engagement, especially when they question representation or narrative framing. In an era when directors often face public scrutiny, it seems counterintuitive to withdraw entirely. Why not respond, explain your approach, or debate your vision? But Eastwood operates from a different value system, the one he's cultivated over 60+ years in film. He sees clarity in the economy. He values discipline. He believes drama belongs on screen, not in production emails or late-night talk shows. And when his boundaries are challenged, he doesn't debate with shouty statements. He simply closes the door, moves forward, and preserves the integrity of his process. We live in an age when sometimes the loudest voice wins, but Clint Eastwood doesn't need volume. His films, his legacy, and his practices speak for themselves, and that is precisely why, when someone clashes with that process, the response is deliberate and final. What sets this approach apart is the permanence of it. You may never know until months or years later that someone was never invited back. There were no scandals, there were no viral controversies. They were just quietly left out. And to Eastwood, that says everything. In today's creation landscape, where every misstep can become a headline, it can feel risky to retreat from conversation. But for Eastwood, retreat isn't weakness, it's an assertion. It's choosing to craft boundary lines and preserve them. His silence isn't passive, it's intentional, it's authoritative, and it's consistent. In 1992, the project that would become Unforgiven started with an electric premise. Eastwood, already a celebrated actor and director, was heading a Western designed to deconstruct the myths he had helped create over decades. Hackman an actor with his own powerful gravitas and a reputation for intensity, agreed to take on the role of Little Bill Daggett, the troubled, violent sheriff. On paper, it looked like a perfect synergy of talent. But from the first days of shooting, things didn't flow smoothly. Eastwood is known for his calm sets, with little rehearsal, minimal takes, and a preference for restraint. He favors planning out scenes carefully and emphasizing performance over spectacle. Hackman, well known for being more vocal, often challenged direction, questioned blocking, and sometimes suggested changes to dialogue. While these instincts might help many directors, Eastwood saw it differently. In his set, everyone was expected to follow, not debate. One example stands out among stories from the set. During a crucial confrontation scene, Eastwood offered a line reading, intending it a certain way. Hackman paused mid-scene, looked at Eastwood, and said, "That line doesn't work. I'm not saying it." The remark, though not shouted, broke the rhythm of the take. Eastwood replied softly, "You will?" Without raising his voice, he asserted his role. It was enough. The atmosphere grew thick. The take resumed, and though events weren't explosive, something fundamental had shifted. Later, Hackman would go on to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. Eastwood grabbed Best Picture and Best Director. On screen, they were aligned. Off-camera, unraveling trust remained. The accolades masked a fissure. Neither man spoke publicly about any tension. It was never brought up in interviews, panel discussions, or award shows. Yet the truth was simple. After Unforgiven, the two never worked together again. This matters because of who Hackman was and Eastwood's career at that time. Hackman was not just any actor. He was a seasoned award winner, known for bringing charisma and unpredictability to every role. Eastwood, too, was at his peak. Still directing, still making controlled, serious work. One might expect professional curiosity to bring them back together, but that didn't happen. Over the following years, both men worked on high-profile projects. Eastwood made films like Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Gran Torino, and American Sniper. Hackman appeared in movies like The Birdcage, Enemy of the State, and A Time to Kill. But their careers never intersected. There were no guest spots, no reunions. The industry noticed. It's tempting to suspect that the lack of collaboration was a simple result of two busy professionals whose careers naturally drifted apart. But anecdotal evidence suggests something stronger. Eastwood didn't invite Hackman back. At interviews, Eastwood would mention working with Unforgiven, highlighting collaborators like Morgan Freeman and Richard Harris, but Hackman rarely came up. It wasn't anything dramatic, it was just consistent quiet. Some insiders suggest that neither man was trying to score points. It wasn't a grand falling out. Hackman wasn't attempting to upstage Eastwood. Instead, it was more personal, more individual. Eastwood's sets were defined by respect for process. Hackman's style may have threatened that environment. Eastwood may not have disliked him personally, but he didn't trust him as part of his ideal production ecosystem. In his world, trust and professional alignment matter above all else. Once broken, it isn't given a second chance. That silence mattered. Eastwood's single-take type of leadership worked best with actors who accepted it. Over the years, players like Morgan Freeman, James Garner, and Tom Stern adapted well. Hackman, however, showed that sometimes professional pride overrides smooth workflow. That was likely enough from Eastwood's perspective to close the door. In the final analysis, this unresolved tension becomes a lesson in how two artists, even legendary ones, can come together for something brilliant, yet still part ways. Unforgiven remains one of the most acclaimed westerns ever made. It stands as evidence that momentary tension doesn't have to destroy a project, but it also reminds us that time heals, or reveals, different wounds. Eastwood's silence speaks volumes, more than any apology could. Stepping back to view the broader picture, Part 2 and 3 of this study looked at stories that involved public criticism or social media digs. Here, in Part 4, the staging of the feud is sober, private, but equally real. That matters because it highlights the nuance of Eastwood's method. He doesn't need to air conflict. He doesn't even need to record it. He just acknowledges it silently and then builds anew. Reflecting on the 5 names we have at least partially examined so far, seen or unseen, the common threads are clear. These individuals tested certain lines, whether they were drawn by ideology, history, style, or disruptive behavior. Eastwood's response wasn't drama. It wasn't public vindication. It was containment. He didn't want to prove he was right. He wanted to protect his space, and if you cross that space in a way he considers significant, the answer is always the same: silence and removal. That has far-reaching implications if we look at how modern filmmaking functions. Creative collaboration often involves negotiating differences. Some directors consult collaboratively, others circle up to resolve disputes. But Eastwood has shown that sometimes the strongest tool is the absolute finality of removing tension entirely. He doesn't renegotiate. He removes the item entirely from the set of possible variables. It is an artist's version of the nuclear option: soft in delivery, hard in result. This brand of silence may be uncommon, but it's not unique in artistic communities. Writers burn bridges, musicians blacklist collaborators. But Eastwood's manifestation of it is unusual because he embodies it through decades of award-winning films, high-stakes projects, and global recognition. And yet he remains unmoved, unbothered, aligned to his principles. Now, as the series wraps up, it becomes clear Eastwood isn't a man without friends, far from it. But he is a man who chooses his circle by its compatibility, not its size or fame. He is slower to forgive and quick to reset. His silence is not a sign of fear or avoidance. It's a statement of self-definition. You can argue it's harsh. Some might say he should have found a way to work again with Hackman, or to negotiate with Moore or Lee. In an age of public apologies and reconciliations, Eastwood's method seems cold. But for him, that may be the point. If you go through the fire and come out with your vision intact, why risk letting in another spark that could burn the edges? Ultimately, Clint Eastwood's silent dismissals offer a portrait of discipline. Creative discipline, yes, but also personal discipline. A lifetime of filmmaking taught him that reputation is shaped as much by who you exclude as who you embrace. And closure doesn't require fireworks. It just requires silence. It just requires walking away and never looking back. From Oscar night in the lobby to Unforgiven, from public feuds to private tensions, Eastwood has proven over and over that some doors are meant to stay closed, and for better or worse, that is the code by which the gunslinger lives and crafts his legend.